you got in trouble again for quoting from Zero Hedge.
Yeah, you saw that. I sort of backpedaled a little and just kind of gave my just diversity of thought response, but a little bit more. And also provided a disclaimer. Hey, I don't believe gold is a timeless asset. This article is basically a gold promoter, you know. But I think talking about common sense ways, using abstract, valuable things like using, clear, valuable things like gold in the market as a means of talking about how other countries are circumventing the US dollar already. Like, notice how the last time they got triggered on zero hedge, we never talked about the issue of, well, should the SEC be collecting and correlating everyone's PII information and distributing it to 3,000 agencies without a, you know, without, you know, yeah, like, I mean, is that their mandate? Anyway, so this is it's just like, I thought this was like escape surveillance capitalism. Why are we triggered by a article that discusses how that happens? Anyway,
Yeah, no, it's conditioning. I believe people are conditioned. Certain sources are safe to read and quote, and others are not. It's like this weird self-censoring mindset that people get into.
yeah,
Particularly, I mean, the more sort of ideologically uh, dedicated, you might say, sort of the more invested people are in their ideology, the more they seem to care about what sources they read or quote, and not so much read, but says, well,
that's
don't amplify them, right, by
yeah.
citing them. Um,
Well, it's the cancel culture.
but isn't the question, can you find an article that discusses this issue from another point of view, or is this truly a non-issue? And if so, explain why it's a non-issue, right? Yeah, some sources are suspicious, and some sources are propagandistic, for sure. But
Yeah.
the issues they raise still need to be considered on their merits.
You know, I think part of it, and as I read, as I was reading Aram's sort of response, is that they're also projecting this inability to dialogue that, for example, like Twitter and Facebook and social media sort of prevents, long form narrative, like long form dialogue, like Joe Rogan's podcast. Like, it's kind of a game changer because it prevents, it just gives you so much more context to evaluate, the information and the people, and when he pulls up
Yeah, and his
sources
point
too
is
and
just
share the source, and I'm just being I was being lazy about it, sharing it from the aggregator, but I was at least sharing it the source that I got it from because I
the
like using
the original
aggregators.
source, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the original source, and so, but just his idea that, well, if someone else doesn't know or check that is BS, then they retweet it or send it off, then that's where misinformation occurs. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
but I think
yeah.
it also occurs when we can't talk about the issues, we just talk about the sources. Is it Rebel Wisdom? Have you heard Rebel Wisdom?
There's a lot of rebel stuff out there, but I don't know about rebel wisdom.
Anyway, they have this like really fascinating meme. Can I screen share? So, have you heard about the cancel god?
Darkness hovers above us. You can feel it, but you cannot see it
Does my audio work? Are
because
you
a
hearing it?
god has been summoned.
Yeah, it's coming through my headphones,
Good.
so it
He
should
wants to
show up
cancel
fine.
you. He wants to cancel everyone you know. He wants to cancel humanity itself.
We felt that putting this in a mythological story structure would give it a different angle to consider the concept.
So right now,
So anyway, just this like interesting concept of the cancel god. You think that's going to trigger them more if I share that?
Uh, yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I yeah, like when people are vested in a political ideology, whether it's left, right, or whatever, um, yeah, they have this disease where
things.
They have to call out all the sources. They have to draw the tribal boundaries always. And it's a symptom of this cancel God. I mean, what's in a autocracy do? It tries to control the truth, and it has messaging. You have to message in accordance with the autocracy, or you are penalized. There's a legitimate way of enforcing tribal beliefs, but there are ethical boundaries, right, that need to be observed. Or else, how can tribal beliefs evolve and grow if no dissent is allowed, and if one doesn't recognize that a lot of tribal beliefs are actually promoted by the people with the power in the tribe to preserve their own positions.
Yeah. Speaking of which, shall we go to something like, Claude? Claude 3 was on your sort of transition of...
Yeah, let's look at our show notes for...
Still live treatments and stuff. All right, so Claude 2, yeah, I can start off with this. Do I need to expand this so it a little better? Interesting. Yeah, I want to think about how to kind of get into more of a presentation mode for some of this stuff.
I think it just takes practice.
Yeah.
And you got to critique yourself. So yeah. Claude, what it means to be a peacemaker, how cultivating neutrality builds strong communities. Well, we were just talking about that. Ko-fi or coffee and Substack. So those are topics we could talk about. So let's start with Claude.
Okay, so the biggest improvement of Claude is actually a method improvement that actually gave GPT 3.5 the same jump as Claude 3.5. Or sorry, from GPT 3.5 to 4, how 4 got, significantly better. Claude 3.5 got significantly better. In fact, Claude 3.5, if we go to their blog about it, go to the source, what it shows is that their 3.5 model, oh wait, did they take it off? Oh yeah, here it is better than even their previous Opus model, which is like 5 times more expensive. So like, don't use Claude 3 Opus right now. Like, you're overpaying for a worse model.
Yeah, it's interesting they disclose that. But what are they doing? They're taking some kind of shortcut, or what's going on?
No, I think they're just sort of like, they're expecting to release Haiku and Opus 3.5 at the end of the year. And so I think this is just like AI marketing. I think this is just, people realize they got to migrate from AI. This is just sort of planned obsolescence.
They're maybe trying to get ahead of releases from OpenAI, which is also improving their
correct
models,
yeah, I think
right?
So.
Mm-hmm. But what explains the cost reduction? Isn't there's some kind of proportionality between processing cost, just the computation cost, and the price you pay as an end user, right? Or is that completely disassociated over in a fight for eyeballs? Good question, right?
Yeah. So the cost can come from how many billion parameters are in the model. So the Opus has a lot more parameters. It's slower, and it's got more parameters, and so it requires more infrastructure. So I think there's an infrastructure cost as well. I don't know how much they factor in value, and so, but here's one of the biggest differences in the previous models to these models. It's called vision capabilities, or multimodality. So previous models with vision benchmarks, anything that relates to vision, Claude 3.5 is much better now, and similar to GPT 4.0. But it's interesting how it's still incrementally better across the board, according to, of course, Claude 3 point, Claude, Anthropic's benchmarks. So
Yeah.
I take this with a grain of salt, but to me, I look for the directionality of it. And the directionality of it is, well, boom. Second, Anthropic describes a better privacy policy. Now, whether they have kind of a secret UK backdoor, I wouldn't be surprised. UK, they're independent and they're, from European Union now, and their data sovereignty is at the top of their mind, and they're sort of a surveillance state. So
Yeah, sort of. They're like they're like the original surveillance George Orwell described surveillance state,
so
the UK. With
yeah.
much
So
love
they
for my English brothers, but yeah, this is what it
yeah
is.
yeah. So but the real question of, I think the real major improvement to this can best be described by uh, Ilya, who worked at OpenAI. And this is an interview between the CEO of Nvidia. No, what's the company, the chip
Nvidia,
manufacturer?
Nvidia,
Nvidia.
Nvidia.
And Ilya talking about, just AI and stuff. And he just describes kind of, well, the differences between 4.0 and previous versions. And he talks about like, well, let's just jump into it.
Multimodality. GPT-4 has the ability to learn from text and images and respond to input from text and images. First of all, the foundation of multimodality learning, of course, Transformers has made it possible for us to learn from multimodality, tokenize text and images. But at the foundational level, help us understand how multimodality enhances the understanding of the world beyond text by itself. And my understanding is that when you do multimodality learning, that even when it is just a text prompt, the text understanding could actually be enhanced. And tell us about multimodality at the foundation, why it's so important, and what's the major breakthrough and the characteristic differences as a result.
So there are two dimensions to multimodality, two reasons why it is interesting. The first reason is a little bit humble. The first reason is that multimodality is useful. It is useful for a neural network to see. Vision in particular, because the world is very visual. Human beings are very visual animals. I believe that a third of the human cortex is dedicated to vision. And so by not having vision, the usefulness of our neural networks, though still considerable,
Is this interesting?
is not as big as it could be. So
Well,
it is a very simple
let's
usefulness. It is simply useful.
just
to
do
see.
it one point at a time, I guess.
And GPT-4
Okay.
can see quite well.
So rather than sit and listen to the whole thing.
Perfect. So,
Yeah.
so the idea was, what they're introducing is the fact that these new AI models have vision added into the transformer training data. So whenever it involves, some standardized tests require you to look at an image and then answer a word problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these newer models are so much better at that because they're trained with image and text data together.
So that's the difference between 3.5 Opus, whatever it is, or Claude 3 Opus.
Exactly.
It's one's
Yes.
a multimodal model, and the older one is not.
It's more multimodal of information.
So maybe you can train on less data and get a better result by doing some training tricks, right? Especially ones that involve mixed vision and logic or verbal data.
Yeah, I think that's
That makes sense. So that's the point. And if Claude Sonnet, is it 3.5 Sonnet? It's a multimodal model, and that explains it's better performance,
Widespread. Yeah.
especially on vision. Yeah, I'm curious. I see more and more AI. Obviously, AI generated images. Um, I think there's a tendency for people to discount them. It's like they'll recognize, oh, that image is AI generated, and I notice there's an emotional difference when I see an AI generated art. I'm not as impressed somehow when I see art that's generated by an artist and it's cool. I say, wow, a human being imagined that and then actually sort of put it together. The pixels, either drawing it out by hand or doing it with a computer, but nonetheless, they didn't just sit back and let a computer generate for them. So it kind of it changes my attitude towards the imagery, and I'm wondering how that's going to affect the experience, especially when it gets to video and special effects. If people are going to say, that just looks like AI generated stuff, or just even if it's very good quality, but they know it's AI generated, if it's going to diminish the wow factor. It kind of does for me. Um, I know there was certainly a time I would watch animation and such because I wanted to see the skill of the artists, right? And how they put the story together with the artwork. And if AI is just doing it and all they're doing is prompting, I don't know, I think I'm going to lose some interest in pretty pictures. I'm going to want more substance. Um, what do you think? Does your attitude change when you're looking at art that or seems to be AI generated versus art that seems to be hand or produced by a human?
Yeah, because I'm on one side. Um, on one side, I watched my dad. I grew up watching my dad edit images, photos that he took of people, and he would soften wrinkles, brighten teeth, slim skin, fat bulges, like just different, just like clean them up, make them look a little better. Um, and trying to portray a sharper version of yourself, like, to me, I think ooh, we have a heart towards authenticity. I think that human, like,
Yeah,
I'm drawn.
and individualism too. Like if you and I
Yeah,
give the same prompt to the same AI, we're going to get this more or less the same results, maybe with a little randomness put in. But and so we can't see the artist, the personality, the imagination of the artist anymore. Suddenly, there's no artist. It's just this kind of mechanized agglomeration of human art. It has no soul or no character, no individuality.
yeah, exactly. So I think it's more about the authenticity meter, and that is, wow, that's amazing. Oh, it was created by robots.
Yeah,
Okay, well, that robot is amazing. Not like the
yeah, the
that's
robot's amazing, but the art isn't because it was
yeah, yeah.
created by robots. Yeah.
So it's um,
So I think this is going to have an effect. I think you can already see it. Um, I think you saw it even before AI got really big, heavy into the vision space or popularized. Um, in kind of this trend to do memes that are sort of crude and they look hand drawn. Sort of the Pepe the Frog, the various. I've just noticed the quality of the artwork seems to get worse as the AI gets better. As It's like a proof that this is an authentic human message because it's crappy.
yeah, and then there's like memes and stuff, and so but on the flip side, like, I completely am excited about, since all the busy work of moving pixels around is gone, what does the next generation of photographers look like?
Yeah, I
Like, how
think
much?
that's the question. It's not so much my emotional reaction or even yours. Mine is even less relevant because I'm a boomer, right? and my generation's dying out. That's just the way generations work. So it's more like, so what are the children that are going to be raised on AI art? How are they going to react to it?
Right.
I, I don't know.
Well, and I think I also really think that, and this speaks a little to sort of my spec that we've been talking about more later, the hashing spec later, but it fundamentally comes down to that, like, the internet needs to be linkable, and sure, we have the definition of links, but how hard is it to, you know, take, attribute someone's photo? Well, you have to, like, copy their photo, and then you have to go find the, their name and their particular way of attribution, and then you could put it over in your footer, and it's a very just ad hoc manual process.
Yep.
And part of it is because the internet was designed to be sort of well, client server, so that once you uploaded stuff, it was there, and it wasn't source controlled and source verified. So, I think that future generations are going to see images, and they're going to be able to clearly see who the author was, and whether it was AI, human, or combination of. So yeah, next topic, or
Yeah. And just to wrap this up, I think it's interesting to me. I've read a lot of science fiction over the years, and there's very few, if any, that authors who anticipated that robots would be creating art that has an emotional impact. It just seemed like it was sort of, of course, robots are going to be logical and they do everything. They have no sense of humor. But now you have bots with a sense of humor, and poets, and I think that's really a change in expectation of the future that the human race as a whole is not prepared for. I don't know how that relates to the rest of my life, but it's just an observation. Okay, well, let's talk about what it means to be a peacemaker. So for that, I'm going to go to wikiwe.org. And maybe it should be more. Well, here it is. Principles we abide and gently promote. We as principled peacemakers are each responsible to embody 3 core principles for peacemaking. And actually, we could probably take off by promising. Principled resolution promise. A promise to authentically, directly, peacefully, and proactively provide feedback and respond to complaints within 30 days. Instead of legal action, I will first seek resolution through direct discussion. Second, prepare and share a record detailing my claim, proposed remedy, controlling principles, and undisputed facts with a fellow principled peacemaker. Third, involve a neutral principled peacemaker to help reach an agreeable resolution. And fourth, if required, resolve the dispute by binding arbitration before a mutually acceptable arbitrator. So it's a commitment to proactive conflict resolution, and it's an agreement to arbitrate, if you look at it just in purely legal terms. Is it enforceable? I think that's going to be context specific, and we won't really know until 2 people who have made this promise, or one of them decides to sue another person who's made the promise, and the defendant raises it as a defense. That's the only way we'll know. And of course, results will vary. I think there's a legal issue from there on the issue of, is this a contract? Is it a forcible contract? Because it's made as a pledge or promise. Yeah. So for a contract to be enforceable, there has to be consideration, which typically means an exchange of promises. If 2 people have, right? And it used to require like some cash or some tangible property, but that, because so much commerce is done on promises nowadays, that um, that has gone by the wayside. So you no longer even need to recite consideration. But it was ideas. Look, people make promises all the time that are not enforceable in court because there's no consideration. They're just gratis. So certainly this couldn't be enforced against somebody who had not taken this promise. But what if somebody had? Would the fact that two people made the same promise, would that be viewed as an exchange of promises? I think
Yeah, and I think
yeah, that's an interesting
yeah,
moral
I
question.
think that's the idea is
Yeah.
that because there's a mutual exchange value, because I think what happened is that contract law came out of this world where it's the buy sell protocol. One person's the buyer, the other person's the seller. One person has money, the other one doesn't. And so, well, if you make a promise and I don't give you the money, haha, like, or I didn't agree to give you any money, then it was just a one-sided promise and you were expecting money, but I didn't commit it, right? And so I think that's my understanding of sort of some of the reasoning behind
Yeah,
consideration.
well, I think the common law, and it's a little different when you look at uh, uh, non-common law jurisdictions where it's statutorily based, or based ultimately back in the old Roman law. But common law jurisdictions like the UK and the US, so common law was around long before we had kind of the capitalist society we had. It arose in the days of serfdom, right? There were just different social structures. But the same principle there was there, that the king's court wasn't going to hear every promise. It had to be, if it was more than a certain amount, it had to be in writing, and there had to be this consideration. It couldn't just be you couldn't just say, yeah, you can borrow my horse tomorrow, and then you show up tomorrow and there's no horse. You couldn't enforce that promise unless you had paid for it, right? Um, and I think there's a sort of a social policy and a jurisdictional quality there of the court has to limit what it hears, because it kind of can't let every disagreement come before it. It has to limit it to things that are more socially impactful. And the fact that people are going to break casual promises all the time, maybe it's just almost part of human nature. But if you pay for it, if you pay to borrow the horse, you rent the horse for the next day, then that's where the possibility of fraud and sort of social degradation occurs. Um, maybe
Yeah, there's
not.
more
Yeah,
economic
yeah,
value. There's more economic impact to assess and adjudicate.
yeah, yeah. Economic impact, I guess, is one way to look at that.
So, yeah. So and I think that it's less that I think it'll be unenforceable. I think it's more that our legal system has become so codified with all of these tricks that lawyers learned to play games and get things pushed through, like winning on technicalities rather than winning on substance and the law and the evidence. So that to me is, I think, more of it's the bigger question is what games and tricks are going to be used to just completely circumvent and avoid this.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think one trick would be that there's been no agreement here, or there's. But if two people have made the same pledge, it seems to me like it's an exchange of promises. Um, but really, no. I think this would be a good topic for
for a legal roundtable.
yeah, legal research, or why, you know, a paper to be published in a legal journal, right? What's the effect?
Well, I think in future episodes we can actually invite a panel of of lawyers from different perspectives, different, some.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's like, what's the effect of these sort of social pledges that are made? They're made with some formality. There's actual signatures. I mean, I think all of these issues, that would be really an interesting topic um, for WikiWe, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that I know there's lawyers wanting to kind of get out there as thought leaders and comment on things.
Yeah, we need
So
to figure out a better format because this, I think, you need to be on the screen in OBS Studio. And
yeah,
I think all our guests, if we can't do that, then we need to do it on Zoom or around or somewhere where um, we we can see everybody's as they're talking.
yeah,
I'm sure there's a way to do that on OBS, but I just haven't looked into it. But I think that would be maybe a good thing to
Switching
try
the
for
cameras.
while we're talking, and so there might be a way that we can feed our information into a third party producer who then produces a program as we just sort of don't have to worry about our settings. We can just talk and interact, which is how the pros do it, right? I'm sure that's how Joe Rogan does it, etc.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly. He's got someone else that kind of produces while he
yeah,
just floats.
and I don't
So
think we need to be in the same studio, but it seems like that's the best quality when you can do that. I know it'd be easy to do if I've got another camera here and we could get another mic. It'd be easy to put it up in a studio. Can we do it remotely without going through a program like Zoom? I don't know, but that wasn't the topic today. So let's go on to, and the other bit of this integrity. I promise to be honest, fair, and authentic, always keeping my word and taking responsibility for my actions. I will uphold my ethical principles, build trust, and maintain consistency in my relationships and interactions. Quite a bit more there than just basic good faith. Um,
yeah, it's like proactive, like it's always keeping my word, even when people aren't looking.
yeah, and
It's
maintaining consistency. What exactly does that mean? Does that mean you can't change your mind about whether or not you want to be friends with somebody?
yeah, and
Uh,
I think that's really that might be worth clarifying
mm-hmm.
because because I think one point of this is to be able to have dynamic relationships by which one time, you know, just for example, using the employer paradigm, one time I work for you and the next time you work for me, and like we don't we haven't in capitalism we haven't developed protocols by which we can kind of rotate who's the boss in an effective way in some ways, or who's leading who, and so to me, consistency of relationship I think is really important. Is that's just because it's a human expectation, but how does that apply in this case?
Yeah, what does that mean? When I think it'd be going too far to say that you can't decide that for whatever reason a relationship's not working out.
Yeah.
Um,
Once an employee, always an employee. Nope, we got to make it
no,
consistent.
obviously not, right? That wouldn't work. Um, but there is something real there. It's like when people don't, and this sort of goes on to the next zone of mutual respect, of respecting the autonomy of others. I think part of maintaining consistency is just respecting people that you've had relationships with. Not ghosting them for arbitrary reasons, or if you are terminating a relationship, to state it, right? Not to be using this sort of manipulation of the communication medium and stream to influence other people in a dishonest way, like sort of just not being inauthentic or being overly reckless or lazy, right? I think there's sort of a proactivity to this.
Yeah.
What? Yep.
Yeah.
Is it too much, too specific, or too general? I don't know. This one, I'm pretty comfortable with this. I I
To,
think
to
so.
me, to me, there's an integrity. There's sort of an implied integrity ethic across the board, in like the legal and in education, and there's just different industries that police officer integrity is important, but like yeah, how domain specific. I think this general case is helpful, and I think helps just gives us a starting place. But I think that, yeah, there might be some customization depending upon certain professions or things.
And all of this would depend on ultimately it's what the arbitrator, I mean, if two people couldn't agree otherwise on how to deal with a breach of integrity. I mean, it's just sort of like if you don't show up for a date, I think that's a breach of integrity. And
Oh yeah,
that shows a lack of consistency. It's like, say,
I'm not keeping my word.
I'll meet you
I'm
there
not
at 6
keeping my word.
p.m. and you don't show up and don't follow. That's a
I
breach,
think ghosting
right?
someone after you've established and communicated sort of you know a relationship that doesn't involve death by silence or exit by silence. I think ghosting someone is lacks integrity.
Yeah. And then I think the question is, what's the remedy? I think if I say I'm going to meet you at the restaurant and I don't show up for no good reason because of my lack of integrity, I kind of owe you for at least your cost in going there and meeting me, right? Uh, but that's very context specific and it'll change.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I read the next one and comment first?
yes, go ahead.
So, first of all, I do love the second one. Hopefully, my audio's okay. I promise to respect the autonomy of others, to refrain from seeking remedies in excess of their binding promises and agreements, and to refrain from claiming obligations from others greater than my own obligations to them. So the thought, like, I think what balances this out is that their respect for autonomy and the respect of kind of individuality, and this, by the way, if someone doesn't want to be autonomous, I think is about respecting the levels of autonomy of others.
Well, yeah, you can indenture yourself,
Yeah.
but that indenturehood normally will have a term, at some time period or some purpose. You don't just, if you do it because you're being forced to, it's not a voluntary transaction, right? If you're doing it voluntarily, it means you're getting something back for that. And normally, even if it's for a term, I think that the indentured person, um, in most cases, needs to be able to quit. Or again, it's not a voluntary relationship, and
Yeah, no, exactly. Because
there's
otherwise,
not a
you're not
respect.
respecting.
Yeah,
Yeah, the temporary indenturehood, as you called it, is the fact that it sort of creates autonomy. That this isn't a forever thing. It's just for now. This is the flow of control in this domain, or sometimes it's just organizational expedience and efficiency.
yeah, and normally it's for working off a debt. Like, let's say if you wanted to be apprentice to learn some skill, and it's a lot of work to have an apprentice to be a master, and you invest a lot of time in a person,
Yeah.
and you expect to be paid back in some fashion.
Yep. But if they just leave and then
Yeah,
suddenly start competing with you,
yeah, they could do that. It's not a crime, but they have a responsibility because they've collected their part of the bargain and haven't performed, um, on
and I
their
think that's the balance
obligations,
between
right?
maintaining consistency in relationships and interactions, but also respecting autonomy.
Yeah. And, I don't think there's one answer to all this. I think the whole point of this type of conflict resolution is it's going to come down to the arbitrator's opinion. And so you're going to get results all over the board. But within a given community, you're going to have a drift, um, towards a certain sort of expectation that will grow, and it's just a matter of culture. All
And
right.
is there a hierarchy to these promises, principles?
I think they
Like, is it
work.
if I was arbitrary?
I think they work together. I think they're all
If
I
I was
don't
a
see it.
neutral and I was like stuck between maintaining consistency of relationship or respecting the autonomy, which is promise 2 and 3 respectively, what I don't know. I kind of think that there's just uh, you know like courts look at how documents are drafted and written, and they use like the hierarchy to sort of make sense of it. And so I think it depends on the context, and clearly an arbitrator could in some cases place integrity higher. Maybe for certain professions or context, integrity was the most important and should be the prevailing promise to consider.
Yeah.
So
I think the ways of interpreting this are as varied as humans. Uh, but there's not too much here, and there's is this the right amount? I don't know, but we have a number of people who have taken this promise already, and I feel like it's something that I could sell within at least Western culture to a certain subset of the population would find this not a scary you know relationship to enter into. But if you check with a lawyer, that would have consequences, I think. But let's put a pin in that for have a legal discussion and maybe get some lawyers on when we get our audio video completely figured out.
yeah, to be.
And we sort of started with this cultivation with talking about cultivating neutrality and citing sources, and because it just so happened coincidentally that you had that experience in one of the communities that we're both members of, where you
Yeah.
cited a source that was probably deservedly had a reputation for being uh, unreliable or sensationalist sometimes, or promoting a certain agenda, had a definite bias. Um, but the merit of the article itself never came up because it was only about the source. All the discussion.
Both times I cited this, we just talked about the source rather than the substance.
Yeah, and I think rather than bemoaning the fact that this citing certain sources triggers people, it's maybe up to us as neutrals to do the kind of the homework. We say we read the article, there was a point raised, having the
Um,
sensitivity to be aware
Bias.
of these biases and these triggers, and then going down to the next level and finding, okay, so what's beneath, what point are they raising, what's the original source. Now you might actually get less response that way, but it gives you an opportunity to decide, is this really a serious issue, or is this an issue that I should bring up in the group, or is it just something that kind of occurred to me on the spur of the moment that seemed interesting and maybe relevant to a discussion we're having. But so I think going through that weighing process before bringing up topics is a meritorious thing to do. It's a good thing to do, and uh, to cite original sources. There's just so much hazard.
Yeah. No, that's like he was like after I talked about just his diversity of a point. His biggest point was, well, don't cite the aggregator. I'm like, great.
Yeah,
Well, that's a good point.
yeah.
I don't mind being the canary that gets it wrong.
No, totally. And I think that we should.
I don't always want to be, but
You don't always want to be. You don't want to have the reputation, but
yeah.
at the same time, it's like, don't be a hypocrite too. And I'm not talking to you personally, but it's just like, I think there's a tendency for people to be very sensitive to the biases of those they disagree with, and not sensitive to their own blind spots and biases. So, um, how do you gently point that out without alienating people? I think that's tough. We're all very protective of the narratives that we hold most dear, and some things we're not willing to discuss. It's just not. but I'll use an example from religion, right? So if you're a, if you hold to a particular religion that has this idea of salvation, like Christianity, where you sort of have this evangelical burden to share the religious beliefs and point of view, you do have this burden, I think, to listen to people's objections and to try to meet them where they're at if they're interested in a civil discussion with you. But if they're not interested, it's kind of, you've got to shake the dust of your feet off, and leave them be in peace. Um, and I think that that kind of lesson is still valid today. That if people are not getting it, but they want to discuss, then it's kind of on to you. But if they're completely closed to the message you're trying to communicate, then it's better just to leave it be rather than shout over them. And
Yeah, I think shouting back or trying to fight fire with fire just creates a bigger fire, you know?
yeah,
And I think that if you, like, first of all, if you just bombard someone with stuff that they don't want to receive, they're going to just stop listening and ignore you. And then you've kind of burnt a bridge, right? But then, second, if if you're even if you're trying to like subtly doing it and they haven't cut you off yet, but you're trying to, I mean, this is since you brought religion into it, it's like it's interesting because for some sects in Christianity, evangelism is just a huge thing because of the mission of Christ at the end to bring the gospel to all nations. But to someone who has an upside down definition of it or just is already kind of whatever, it's like rejecting propaganda. If you just involuntarily subject someone and coerce them to that, force involuntary re-education is just
yeah. There's been a lot of it over the centuries, right? With the Inquisition, and going to church was mandatory in the early United States. I know.
I grew up on an island where they were forced to learn Spanish and Japanese, and because they lost their language, they've lost a big part of their culture and their you know cultural identity. So yeah, it's a interesting problem. So, but yeah, no, but I also think that just being able to come up with I've been thinking about how do we verify and source and things like that, and to me it's of course the answer comes down to hash pretty much everything, but don't hash it on a computer file / document level. I think it's time to I think we can start hashing things on a human readable level. It's not just hashing for the computer, it's hashing for the human now. And now if someone sends me a quote, there's something called a man in the middle attack where, I mean, on Signal, I'm pretty sure that because of our end-to-end encryption and because of the way it's designed, I'm not suffering from any sort of package manipulation in transit.
Yeah.
But
not an email, not an email.
But not an email.
Yeah.
I mean, you get junk sent to the spam filter all the time for just using unpopular anyway. But yeah, but I think when we hash things, then it allows anyone through any medium and any channel to be able to actually verify that the contents of the message were never manipulated. And so, and therefore,
if the
source,
hash,
like, how do we source things? Do we source things by their website address, or
if the hash is reliable, right? So how do you make sure that the hash hasn't been altered?
No. Okay, so now, do we want to keep recording this? Because I can teach you about hashing now, and I use some Claude 3 to use it to do it.
Well, okay, we'll go ahead and stop the stream, and
okay. This is a VIP only conversation,
right.
So you'll have to join the VIP.
So thanks if anyone's watching. Thank you, and
right.
we'll probably put bits of this conversation on our website, our YouTube channel.
Adios.
Adios.
Da 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 da.